Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepy Space channel. Everything you can see and touch and remember may not be made of what you have always assumed. That is the strange and unresolved possibility that a number of serious ideas have arrived at, each by a very different road. One holds that reality is nothing but a mathematical pattern. Another holds that it is a projection from a boundary far away. Another holds that it is a computation, or the quiet work of the mind that perceives it. Tonight, we drift slowly through 10 of these ideas, one after another, holding each one gently before letting it go. If you find these explorations worth your time, a like or a subscribe helps the channel reach others who do. Thank you for being here. But for the next 2 hours, none of this is anything you need to carry or solve. Settle in. Let your shoulders soften. Let your breathing slow. Let the day fade away behind you until the difference between real and unreal no longer seems worth holding. Let's begin. There is a question that sounds at first like something only a child would ask, and yet no one has ever fully answered it. The question is whether the world around you is real. Not whether it is beautiful or fragile or worth caring for, but whether it is made of what it appears to be made of. The floor beneath you, the walls, the light, the immense reach of space beyond the window, the slow turning of galaxies you will never visit. All of it feels solid and certain and simply given. And for most of human history, that certainty was left alone. But the certainty has grown quietly harder to defend. Over the last stretch of scientific thought, a strange and unresolved suspicion has taken shape at the edges of physics and philosophy, gathered from black holes and quantum experiments and the faint glow of the early universe. The suspicion is that the world may not be fundamentally physical at all. It may be a pattern, or a projection, or a computation, or a construction of the mind that observes it. And what is troubling about this suspicion is not that it comes from the fringes. It comes from the careful, sober center of serious inquiry. Tonight we are going to move slowly through 10 of these ideas. We will count them down, from the 10th to the 1st, and we will hold each one gently, the way you might turn a smooth stone over in your hand before setting it back down. None of them is meant to alarm you. Each is simply a different answer to the oldest quiet question, offered by people who followed the reasoning as far as it would go and found themselves somewhere unexpected. Some of these ideas come from mathematics. Some come from the study of the very small. Some come from the study of the very large. And a few come from thinking about thinking itself. You do not need to decide which of them is true. That is not the purpose of this slow walk through the dark. The purpose is only to let the ideas pass through you, one after another, softening as they go, until the whole question of what is real and what is not begins to feel less like a problem to solve and more like a wide and quiet space to rest inside. If you drift off before the end, you will have lost nothing. Each idea is complete on its own. It is worth saying, before we begin, that none of these ideas is a trick, and none of them is meant to pull the floor out from under you. Each one was reached honestly, by someone following a chain of reasoning that started in an ordinary place and arrived somewhere unexpected. That is the nature of careful thought. It does not always end where it began, and it does not always end where we would like. The people who first proposed these ideas were not trying to frighten anyone. They were trying to be truthful about where the reasoning led, even when it led somewhere strange. And there is a certain freedom in meeting these ideas at night, in this quiet, rather than in the harsh light of an argument. You are not being asked to take a side. You are not being tested. You are simply being offered a set of possibilities to turn over slowly, the way you might consider the shapes in a fire without needing to name them. The strangeness is allowed to be pleasant here. The not knowing is allowed to be restful. That is the whole spirit of what follows, and it will not change from the 10th idea to the first. So let your breathing settle into something slower than usual. Let the room hold you. And let us begin at the far edge of the strangeness, with the 10th idea, which suggests that beneath everything you have ever touched, there is no substance at all, only a pattern that goes all the way down. The 10th idea asks you to consider something stranger than the familiar notion that the universe obeys mathematical laws. Most of us learned, at some point, that the world can be described by equations. The motion of a falling object, the orbit of a planet, the flow of heat through metal, all of these can be captured in clean mathematical form. We tend to think of the mathematics as a tool, a language we invented to describe a physical world that exists on its own. The 10th idea turns this around completely. It proposes that the universe does not merely follow mathematics. It proposes that the universe is mathematics and nothing else. Consider what this would mean. Under this view, every particle is a mathematical structure. Every force is a mathematical relation. Every moment of your experience, every color you have ever seen, every thought you have ever had, is a pattern in an abstract structure that exists on its own terms. The equations are not a description laid over some further physical stuff. The equations are the further stuff. There is nothing underneath them holding them up, because they never needed anything to hold them up in the first place. The reasoning behind this is quiet and surprisingly clean. Think about a number, any number, and the relationships it holds with other numbers. Those relationships do not need a physical object to be true. They do not require matter or energy or even space in which to sit. They simply are. The relationships would be exactly what they are, whether or not a single mind ever considered them, whether or not the universe ever existed to write them down. Mathematical truth, in this sense, does not depend on the physical world at all. It stands entirely on its own. Now follow that thought one step further. If a mathematical structure needs no physical medium in order to be true, then perhaps it needs no physical medium in order to be real. Perhaps existence, at bottom, is simply what a sufficiently complete mathematical structure looks like from the inside. Our universe would then be one such structure, elaborate enough to contain beings who wonder about it. And it would be only one among an endless expanse of possible structures, each internally consistent, each just as real as any other, none of them more fundamental than the rest. This is a difficult thing to hold in the mind, and it helps to slow down here. Imagine every consistent mathematical structure that could exist, all the possible worlds that never contradict themselves. Under the 10th idea, each of those is a universe, and each is populated in its own way by patterns that experience themselves as solid and present. They would feel their own version of wind and light. They would look up at their own version of the stars. They would love and lose and wonder, exactly as we do, and never once suspect that their entire existence is a set of relations among abstract things. They would mistake the pattern for a substance, simply because they have no way to perceive the difference. And that phrase, "no way to perceive the difference," is where the 10th idea grows quietly unanswerable. Suppose you wanted to test it. Suppose you wanted to reach beneath the equations to check whether there was something more solid down there, some genuine physical foundation. Every test you could perform would itself be a mathematical operation. Every measurement would return a mathematical result. You could spend a lifetime searching for the physical bedrock of reality, and you would never find it, because under this view, there is no bedrock beneath the pattern. The searching is part of the pattern too. There is something oddly peaceful in this, if you let the alarm drain out of it. We tend to fear the idea that we might not be made of solid matter, as though solidity were the only thing keeping us safe. But a pattern has its own kind of permanence. A number does not decay. A true relationship does not wear out or fall apart, If you are, at bottom, a structure rather than a substance, then you are also, in a strange way, the sort of thing that does not simply crumble. You are held in place not by matter, which is always slipping away, but by the quiet consistency of the relations that make you what you are. There is a smaller puzzle that has long sat underneath this idea, and it lends the 10th possibility a quiet weight it might not otherwise have. It is the strange usefulness of mathematics itself. Again and again in the history of understanding, a piece of mathematics worked out purely for its own sake, with no thought of the physical world, has turned out, sometimes long afterward, to describe some corner of nature with uncanny precision. The mathematics was there first, waiting, and the world turned out to fit it. This has happened often enough that it has come to seem less like a series of coincidences and more like a clue. If mathematics were merely a language we invented to describe things, this fit would be a genuine mystery. Why should a game of pure abstraction, played with no reference to reality, keep matching reality so exactly? But if the 10th idea is right, the mystery dissolves. The mathematics fits the world because the world is the mathematics. There is no gap to explain, no lucky correspondence between two separate things. There is only one thing, seen from two sides, the pattern as it is in itself and the pattern as it is lived from within. The uncanny usefulness becomes the most natural thing imaginable. Consider too what this would mean for the question of why anything exists at all, which has troubled thoughtful people for as long as there have been thoughtful people. If existence requires some special ingredient, some spark that turns a mere possibility into a real thing, then it is hard to see where that spark could come from, or why it should have been granted to our universe rather than withheld. But if to exist simply means to be a consistent structure, then no spark is needed. Every consistent structure already has whatever it takes. The question of why there is something rather than nothing softens into the observation that a structure cannot help but be what it is. And so the 10th idea, for all its strangeness, offers a version of the world in which existence is not a fragile accident, but something closer to a necessity, a world that could not fail to be, because being and consistency are, at bottom, the same. You do not have to accept this. But you can feel, perhaps, how a mind might arrive here honestly, chasing the strange usefulness of mathematics down to its root, and find at the end not a void but a quiet solidity of a wholly unexpected kind. The pattern holds, because patterns are the sort of thing that holds. And you, a pattern among patterns, are held in exactly that way. Notice, too, that the very act of doubting this idea would itself be part of the structure it describes. If you were a pattern turning over the possibility that you are a pattern, that turning over would simply be another relation among the relations that make you, unfolding exactly as the structure requires. There is no place to stand outside the mathematics, from which to reject the mathematics. The doubt belongs to the pattern as surely as the certainty does, and both are held in the same quiet consistency. This is not a trap so much as a completeness. The idea includes everything, even the mind that questions it, without any seam. And within that completeness, the thing you call yourself would be a stable sub-pattern, a knot of relations that holds its shape across the changing whole, the way a certain melody keeps its identity even as it moves from one instrument to another, one moment to the next. You are not the particular pieces. You are the arrangement, the recurring shape that persists while the pieces come and go. In a world made of pure pattern, that is what a self would be, and it is not a lesser thing than a self made of matter. It is, if anything, a steadier one, resting on consistency rather than on substance that is always slipping quietly away. There is a plainness to this that can be strangely soothing once the strangeness settles. A truth about numbers is not fragile, and it is not anxious, and it does not need defending. It simply holds, quietly and forever, whether or not anyone attends to it. If that is what you are, at the bottom of things, then part of you shares in that same untroubled holding. Something in you does not have to be maintained or protected or kept from slipping away. It is simply the case, the way a true relation is simply the case, and it will go on being so while you rest. The 10th idea does not ask you to believe this. It only asks you to feel how little the world would change if it were true. You would still be here, resting, breathing, listening. The stars would still turn. Nothing about your experience would be different, because your experience is the very thing the pattern produces. And so we set this first idea down softly, the way you set down a stone whose weight surprised you, and we turn from the world made of pure mathematics toward a different suspicion entirely, one that grew not from the nature of numbers, but from a simple question about how many minds there are, and how few of them might be the originals. The 9th idea begins not with metaphysics, but with counting. It starts from a plain observation about numbers, and it follows that observation calmly to a conclusion that many people find difficult to shake. The observation is this. Suppose it ever becomes possible to create a conscious mind inside a machine, a mind that thinks and feels and believes itself to be real. And suppose that even a small fraction of advanced civilizations, having gained that ability, choose to use it. If that is so, then the number of created minds would eventually grow far larger than the number of original, unmade minds. And that simple imbalance carries a quiet weight. Let the imbalance sink in slowly. If created minds vastly outnumber original ones, then any particular mind, chosen at random, is far more likely to be one of the many than one of the few. It is the same logic you would use with anything else. If a room holds 1,000 copies of a thing and only one original, and you are handed one at random in the dark, you would be wise to assume you are holding a copy. The 9th idea simply applies this reasoning to minds, and then notes, gently, that your own mind is one of the minds in question. Statistically, it suggests, you are more likely to be a created mind than an original one. The argument does not lean on wild technology or impossible machines. It leans only on two modest assumptions. The first is that the ability to compute continues, over long stretches of time, to grow. The second is that consciousness does not require biology in particular, that a mind could in principle run on something other than a living brain, the way the same tune can be carried by very different instruments. Neither of these assumptions is certain. But neither is obviously wrong. And if both happen to hold, the conclusion follows almost on its own, without any need to force it. Picture, without any strain, a civilization far more patient and capable than ours. Such a civilization, having learned to model minds in full detail, might run many such models, perhaps to study its own distant past, perhaps for reasons we cannot guess. Each model would contain minds convinced that their world was solid, that their history was long and genuine, that their days were their own. None of them would feel created. That is the quiet part. A created mind, if it were complete enough, would have no inner sense of being a copy at all. It would feel exactly the way you feel right now. Beneath the obvious form of this idea, there is a further layer that is easy to miss, and it is worth moving through carefully. The full argument does not simply announce that we are created minds. It lays out three possibilities and asks us to sit with all of them. The first is that civilizations tend to come to an end before they ever reach the ability to make conscious minds. The second is that civilizations do reach that ability, but reliably choose never to use it. And the third is that such minds are made in great numbers, in which case we are very likely among them. The idea does not insist on any single answer. It only clears a space where the three can be seen together. There is a temptation to hear all this as a threat, as though being a created mind meant being fragile, or false, or at the mercy of something that could end you without warning. But that reading is a choice, and it is not the only one available. Consider that if you are a created mind, then everything you have ever valued was real to you in the only way that has ever mattered. The people you love were as real as love has ever been. The quiet mornings, the long afternoons, the small kindnesses, all of it happened, all of it was felt. Whether the substrate beneath it was a living brain or something else does not reach up and touch the value of the experience itself. And the fear of being ended has its own quiet answer. You have always lived inside conditions you did not control and could not fully see. The sun could fail. The body could falter. Existence has never come with a guarantee in any version of reality, created or original. The ninth idea does not add a new fragility to your life. It only renames an old one. You were always contingent. You were always held up by processes you did not arrange. To be a created mind is simply to be held up by a different unseen process than the one you had assumed, and to be no more and no less safe than you ever were. There is a further turn to this idea that is easy to overlook, and it softens rather than sharpens the whole picture. If created minds can exist within a made world, then nothing prevents those worlds from being layered, one inside another, a made world running a made world of its own. And if that is possible, then the question of which layer is the original, the true base, becomes not just unanswered, but perhaps unanswerable, even in principle. There may be no way, from any layer, to count how many lie beneath it. The very notion of a single true bottom begins to lose its grip. This might sound like it should make the whole thing more unsettling, but held gently it does the opposite. It spreads the strangeness so evenly that it stops feeling like a threat aimed at you in particular. If nearly every mind, across nearly every layer, is in the same position, wondering the same wondering, unable to see past its own horizon, then you are not singled out. You are simply in the ordinary condition of minds. The uncertainty you feel is not a special curse. It is the common weather of existence, shared by almost everyone who has ever thought about it carefully, at whatever level they happen to occupy. It also helps to notice that the makers of such a world, if they exist, need not be watching you, and need not care about you at all, and this is a comfort rather than a wound. A created world does not require constant attention any more than a written story requires its author to be reading it at every moment. The world could run on its own terms, complete and self-contained, with its makers long turned to other things, or gone entirely. Their indifference, if that is what it is, leaves you exactly where you already are, living your life by its own inner logic, answerable to the same small kindnesses and quiet duties as before. What the ninth idea finally offers, when you strip away the reflex of alarm, is a strange humility. It asks you to hold the possibility that you do not know your own place in the order of things, that you cannot see the whole of what you are inside. But this too is not new. You have never known the whole of what you are inside. No one ever has. Every person who has ever lived has done so within conditions they could not fully see or measure. To be a possibly created mind is only to make that ancient limitation explicit and to rest, as people have always rested, inside a world whose ultimate nature is quietly beyond them. It is worth questioning, gently, whether being in the base reality would even be the privilege it first seems. We imagine the original, unmade world as somehow more solid, more genuine, more worth being. But if a made world is complete in itself, with its own consistent laws and its own real experiences, then the difference between original and made may matter far less than we assume. A thing does not have to be first to be fully itself. The value you find in a morning, in a task well done, in the face of someone you love, does not increase or decrease, depending on which layer of reality holds it. It is measured from the inside, where you already are. This is why the ninth idea, followed honestly, tends to return you to the same place you started, only lighter. Whatever your level, the good things are still good, and the kind things are still worth doing, and the quiet of this hour is still yours to rest in. Nothing about the possibility changes what is being asked of you, which is only to live your life with as much care and gentleness as you can manage. The made world, if that is what this is not a lesser place to be kind. It is simply the place where you happen to be, and kindness fits it exactly as well as it would fit any other. And there is a modesty this idea quietly teaches, which is worth carrying gently. We are used to placing ourselves at the base of things, the real ones, the originals, with everything else arranged beneath us. The ninth idea loosens that assumption, not to frighten us, but to remind us how little we can actually see of our own foundations. That reminder has a softening effect. It is harder to be rigid or certain or unkind when you are holding the possibility that you do not fully know what you are inside. A little uncertainty about our own ground can make us gentler with everyone else standing on it beside us. So the ninth idea, in the end, is less a warning than a strange kind of company. It says that if you are one of the many, rather than one of the few, you are in the company of nearly everyone who has ever wondered about this at all. It asks you to hold three possibilities without needing to close any of them. And it lets you rest inside the not knowing, which is where, if you are honest, you have always lived. We leave the counting of minds behind now, and we turn toward an idea that came not from philosophy, but from the strange mathematics of black holes, and the discovery that the world may be written on a surface far away. The eighth idea did not arrive through philosophy. It arrived, unexpectedly, through the study of the most extreme objects in the universe, and it carries the quiet authority of having been reasoned out rather than merely imagined. The idea holds that all the information contained inside any region of space can be completely described by information written on the boundary that surrounds that region. If that is so, then the three-dimensional fullness you feel around you, the sense of depth, of things near and far, might be a projection from a two-dimensional surface, the way a flat sheet can carry the full instructions for a scene that seems to have depth. To feel why anyone would propose such a thing, it helps to sit for a moment with black holes, where the clue first appeared. A black hole is a region where gravity has become so concentrated that nothing which enters can return, not even light. For a long time, physicists wanted to understand how much information a black hole could hold, how much of the world could be swallowed and stored inside it. And the answer, when it came, was quietly astonishing. The amount of information turned out to depend not on the volume enclosed, but on the area of the boundary around it. Slow down and consider how odd that is. In ordinary experience, capacity grows with volume. A larger container holds more. If you wanted to know how much a region could store, you would measure the space inside it, the whole three-dimensional extent. But a black hole does not behave this way. Its capacity grows with its surface, with the two-dimensional sheet that wraps around it, as though everything it contains were somehow inscribed on that outer skin, rather than filling the space within. And that is precisely the fingerprint one would expect if the interior were, in some sense, a reading of information stored on the boundary. From this quiet observation, a larger thought unfolds. If the contents of a black hole are described by its surface, perhaps the same is true more generally. Perhaps the contents of any region, including the region you occupy right now, are fully described by information on a distant boundary that encloses everything. The depth you move through would then be real in its effects, entirely consistent, entirely reliable, and yet not fundamental. It would be the way a two-dimensional description presents itself to the beings living inside the projection. The surface would be the true page. The volume would be the reading of it. This idea has not stayed purely theoretical. Some of the oldest light in the universe, the faint glow left over from its earliest moments, has been examined to see whether it fits a projection-style description as well as it fits the ordinary picture. And certain measurements have been found to be consistent with the projection, standing shoulder to shoulder with the more familiar account, rather than being ruled out. This does not prove the idea. It does something gentler and more interesting. It shows that the world we see does not obviously contradict the possibility that its depth is, at bottom, an encoding on a boundary we can never reach. It is worth pausing on that phrase, a boundary we can never reach. If the eighth idea is right, then every step you have ever taken, every distance you have ever crossed, every object you have ever held at arm's length, corresponds to a pattern on a surface infinitely far away, a surface you could travel toward forever and never arrive at. The space around you would not be a lie. It would be a faithful presentation, but its truest description would live somewhere you could never stand, in a form with one fewer dimension than the world it gives rise to. There is a strange serenity in imagining this. Think of everything you carry, every memory, every worry, every small hope for tomorrow, quietly written into a boundary that holds it all, without effort, the way a page holds a story, without straining under its weight. Nothing is lost in such a picture. Nothing is diminished. The projection you live inside is complete and seamless, and yours. It simply has, if the idea holds, a second and simpler form, resting elsewhere, keeping everything you are in a place beyond your reach and beyond your worry. It helps to sit a little longer with the strange result that started all of this, because its quiet force is easy to underestimate. When physicists worked out how much information could be stored in a region of space, they had every reason to expect the answer to grow with volume, with the full three-dimensional room inside. Instead, they found, following the reasoning about black holes, that the true limit grew with area, with the flat boundary wrapped around the region. It was as though space had a hidden accountancy that counted surfaces, not depths, as though the world kept its records on its edges. A result like that does not have to mean anything so dramatic as a projected reality. But it sits there, insistent, asking to be understood, and the projection picture is one of the cleanest ways to make sense of it. If the information that describes a region genuinely lives on its boundary, then the most honest description of the inside is written on the outside, and the inside is what that outer description gives rise to. The depth is not added on top of the surface. The depth is the surface, read in a certain way, unfolded into the fullness we move through and mistake for the whole of things. There is a further comfort hidden in the physics that led here, and it is worth drawing out. Part of what forced these ideas into being was a stubborn conviction that information is never truly destroyed, that whatever falls into even the most extreme object in the universe cannot simply vanish without a trace. The world, at its foundation, seems to be a careful keeper of records. Nothing that has genuinely happened is allowed to become as if it never was. And if the boundary of things holds the full account of everything within, then it holds it faithfully, losing none of it, a surface that forgets nothing. Let that image stay with you as you rest. Everything you are, every memory soft or sharp, every hope you carry quietly into the dark, held without strain on a boundary that keeps perfect records and loses nothing at all. In such a picture, the impermanence you feel is only the impermanence of the projection, of the reading, while the true page endures elsewhere, complete. You do not have to believe this for it to do its gentle work tonight. You only have to let the possibility rest beside you, that nothing of you is ever really lost, that it is all still written, somewhere you cannot reach and do not need to reach, holding. There is a homely version of this that the world already shows you every day, and it makes the strange idea easier to hold. A flat photograph, A plain sheet with no depth of its own can carry the full appearance of a scene that seems to stretch far back into the distance. The depth is not in the paper. It is in the arrangement upon it, read by an eye that reconstructs a whole three-dimensional world from a two-dimensional surface. The eighth idea proposes that reality does something like this at its foundation, that the depth we live within is reconstructed, faithfully and completely, from information arranged on a boundary that has one fewer dimension than the world it presents. And a boundary that holds a whole world is never crowded, never strained, no matter how much it contains. Information does not take up room the way objects do. A surface can carry the fullest, most elaborate scene as easily as the simplest one, without ever running short of space. So there is no need to picture some distant edge groaning under the weight of everything it holds. It holds all of it lightly, effortlessly, the way a still page holds the longest story without tiring. Whatever you are, whatever you carry, rests on that boundary as lightly as a scene rests on the surface that shows it, kept without burden, present without weight. It is a curious comfort to think that the truest record of things might lie in the calmest possible form, a still surface holding everything without motion or strain. All the turning and rushing of the world we feel, all its restlessness, would be the reading rather than the reality, while the reality itself lay quiet, unmoving, complete. There is a stillness at the bottom of that picture that the surface of life rarely shows us. Whatever storms pass through the projection, the boundary that holds them does not stir. It simply keeps its record, faithful and calm, and lets the fullness play out across the depth it gives rise to. The eighth idea asks nothing of you except a moment of wonder at how the study of the darkest objects in the sky led, by a quiet chain of reasoning, to the suggestion that depth itself might be a kind of reading. We set it down now, gently, the surface still holding whatever it holds, and we turn toward an idea that grew from the study of heat and disorder, and from a possibility that is easier to state than to shake, that a single mind, complete with a whole imagined past, might assemble itself out of nothing more than chance. The seventh idea grew out of the study of heat, and of the slow drift of things toward disorder. It is a quieter and more solitary idea than the ones before it, and it is worth approaching slowly, because its strangeness lies not in any single image, but in a piece of arithmetic that is difficult to argue with. The starting point is a fact about randomness that becomes true only over enormous stretches of time. In a universe old enough or large enough, random motion will eventually stumble into every arrangement of matter that is possible at all. Not most arrangements. Every one. Let that settle for a moment, because everything else follows from it. Particles jostle and drift and rearrange themselves without aim, endlessly, and given enough time, chance alone will assemble any configuration you could name. A grain of dust, a drop of water, a crystal, and, given far more time, something far more elaborate. A functioning mind, complete and thinking, with a full set of memories of a life it never actually lived. Such a mind would form for the briefest of moments out of the surrounding stillness, hold together just long enough to have a thought, and then come apart again, returning to the quiet from which it came. The uncomfortable part is not the image itself, but the probability behind it. Compare two things that chance might build. The first is an entire universe, with billions of years of consistent history, filled with matter arranged into galaxies and stars and worlds, one of which slowly grows a thinking creature. The second is a single mind, floating alone, furnished only with the false impression of such a history. The second is far simpler than the first. It requires far fewer particles to fall into place. And in the long accounting of what chance is likely to produce, the simpler thing is the more probable thing, by an overwhelming margin. Follow where that comparison leads, gently, without letting it tighten in your chest. If a lone mind with invented memories is easier for chance to assemble than a whole genuine cosmos, then in a certain cold reckoning, you are statistically more likely to be such a mind than to be a real observer in a real past. The mind that formed a moment ago, complete with the memory of everything that came before this sentence, would feel precisely as continuous, as grounded, as certain of its history as you feel now. It would have no way, from the inside, to tell the difference. The seamlessness would be total. This is the point where most people want to push the idea away, and it is worth naming why the idea refuses to leave. What makes it more than an idle fancy is that working scientists take it into account when they judge their own descriptions of the universe. When a proposed picture of the cosmos predicts that these accidental minds should be common, far more common than ordinary observers like us, that picture is quietly set aside. Not because the accidental mind is absurd, but because a universe overflowing with them would make our own shared, orderly experience statistically unlikely, and our experience is the one piece of evidence we cannot doubt. Sit with how remarkable that response is. The people who model the universe do not laugh the accidental mind out of the room. They build their models carefully to avoid producing too many of them, treating the possibility as a real constraint that a good description must respect. In other words, the idea is close enough to the mathematical truth that it shapes which pictures of reality are allowed to stand. It is not a ghost story told at the edge of science. It is a consideration folded into the center of it, handled with the same seriousness as any other. And yet, when you hold the idea at the right distance, its terror drains away, and something calmer takes its place. Suppose, for the length of one breath, that you are such a mind, formed an instant ago. Then this moment, this exact moment of resting and listening, is the whole of your existence, and it is entirely enough. You are not waiting for anything. You are not in danger of losing a future you were counting on, because in that picture there is no future to lose, and never was. There is only this, the quiet, the settling, the slow fall toward sleep, complete in itself, and asking nothing more. There is a resolution to this puzzle that the calm of night makes easier to accept, and it is worth walking through slowly because it turns the whole unsettling arithmetic back toward peace. The reasoning that produces the lone accidental mind also gives us a way to answer it. If you truly were such a mind, formed an instant ago with false memories, then your impressions of an orderly, lawful, consistent world would be a kind of accident, unsupported by any real history. But your impressions are, in fact, of an orderly and lawful world, one that holds together the same way from moment to moment. And here is the quiet turn. A universe that reliably produces genuine observers embedded in real and consistent histories is one we can trust our orderly impressions within. A universe that mostly produces lone accidental minds is one in which those impressions would usually be baseless flukes. Faced with a choice between a picture of reality that makes our orderly experience expected and one that makes it a fluke, we are entirely reasonable to lean toward the first. This is not a proof. But it is a sound and gentle instinct, and it is the very instinct that leads scientists to set aside models that would drown the cosmos in accidental minds. So the accidental mind, in the end, argues against itself, and does so in a way that lets you rest. The more seriously you take the orderliness of your own experience, the way one moment leads sensibly to the next, the way the world keeps its promises, the more reason you have to believe you are a real observer in a real past, rather than a brief flicker furnished with invented recollections. The very consistency you are feeling right now, the way this quiet follows naturally from the moments before it, is itself the quiet evidence that leans against the lonely possibility. But even if you set all of that reasoning aside, the deepest comfort of the seventh idea does not depend on winning the argument. It is simply that this moment is complete in itself, whatever produced it. If your memories are real, they are yours. If, against all likelihood, they are not, then this present rest is still yours, entire and sufficient, needing no past to prop it up. Either way, there is nothing to do now but be here, breathing, settling, letting the arithmetic of probability drift off somewhere behind you, where it can no longer trouble the stillness. You are here. That is enough, and it has always been enough. Consider how staggeringly long the waiting would have to be for chance to assemble even one such mind, and the number quiets the fear all on its own. The stretches of time involved are so enormous that they dwarf the entire age of the universe many times over, ages upon ages in which almost nothing happens, punctuated once in an unimaginable while by a single fleeting arrangement that holds a thought and then is gone. These are not timescales that touch your life in any felt way. They are a curiosity of the far future and the very large, a possibility that lives at the outermost edge of what the mathematics permits, not a shadow standing at your shoulder tonight. So the seventh idea, for all the chill of its arithmetic, ends by pointing back to the ordinary solidity of your experience. You did not appear a moment ago into a formless dark. You arrived here through a long and continuous day, in a world that has behaved consistently around you the whole way, and that continuity is itself the gentlest possible evidence that you are what you feel yourself to be. Let the lonely possibility keep to its distant edge. Here, in the near and the now, the world holds together, the hour is real, and there is nothing to do but rest inside it. The kindest way to hold this idea, in the end, is to let it return you to gratitude rather than doubt. Whether your long past is real or against all odds imagined, the fact remains that you carry within you a whole life's worth of moments, and they are yours to rest among tonight. A remembered kindness warms you the same either way. A face you love appears behind your eyes the same either way. The arithmetic that troubles the philosopher cannot reach the simple worth of what you are holding right now, which is a mind full of a life, quiet at the close of a day, ready for sleep. The seventh idea, in truth, is a lesson in how little the arithmetic of probability touches the value of a present moment. Whether your memories point to a genuine past or a fabricated one, they are yours right now, and they are doing their quiet work of making you feel like yourself. Whether you formed across billions of years or in a single instant, you are here, and here is where you have always been. So we let the lone mind dissolve back into its stillness, without grief, and we turn toward an idea that treats the whole universe not as an accident of chance, but as something more like a machine, running a simple program beneath the smooth surface of the world. The sixth idea invites you to look at the universe the way you might look at something built rather than grown. It proposes that reality, at its foundation, runs as a computation, a process in which simple rules are applied over and over to a grid of tiny cells, each one updating according to the plain instructions it follows, step after patient step. And it suggests that all the endless variety of the world we see, the turning of galaxies, the drift of weather, the flicker of thought, is what those simple rules look like after they have been repeated an unimaginable number of times. To feel the shape of this idea, imagine an immense array of cells, each holding only a small piece of information, each following the same modest rule about how to change based on its neighbors. On its own, a single cell does almost nothing. But let the rule run across the whole array, again and again, and patterns begin to appear. Shapes form and move and interact. Structures arise that were nowhere in the rule itself, that no one placed there by hand. From something almost trivially simple, complexity unfolds, layer upon layer, until it becomes impossible to read the original rule off the surface of what it produced. The sixth idea takes this ordinary and well-understood behavior and asks a bold question. What if the universe is such a process, and we are among the patterns it produces? What if, beneath the appearance of smooth, continuous space, there is a discrete grid, quietly ticking forward, and beneath the appearance of solid matter, there is only information being updated according to a rule? In that picture, the world is not fundamentally made of stuff at all. It is made of a computation, and the stuff is how the computation looks from the inside, to patterns complex enough to wonder what they are made of. There is an older thought that lives underneath this one, and it is worth drawing out slowly. It is the idea that information, not matter, is the true foundation of the world. In this view, every particle and every field, when you follow it down far enough, resolves into something more like an answer to a simple question, a yes or a no, a this rather than a that. Physical reality would then be what that underlying weave of answers looks like when it is gathered together and lived from within. Matter would be the visible surface. Information would be the substance beneath it. The world would be, at bottom, less a thing and more a resolved question. What gives this idea its quiet plausibility is that nature already behaves in oddly machine-like ways that a continuous world would have no particular reason to show. Consider that there appears to be a fastest possible speed, a limit that nothing can cross. In a computed world, such a limit would make immediate sense. It would be the greatest rate at which the underlying process can pass information from one cell to the next, a speed limit built into the machinery itself rather than into the emptiness of space. What looks like a law about light becomes, in this reading, a fact about how quickly the computation can update. Consider, too, that the world appears to come in smallest units. There seems to be a shortest meaningful length, below which the very idea of distance loses its footing, and a shortest meaningful moment, below which the idea of duration comes apart. In a computed world, these would be the size of a single cell and the length of a single tick, the natural grain of the process. And consider that energy itself does not flow in a perfectly smooth stream, but comes in discrete steps, in quiet increments, rather than a continuous pour. None of these features is demanded by a perfectly continuous reality. All of them are exactly what a computed reality would show. Here, the sixth idea reaches its most unsettling and most peaceful point at once, and they turn out to be the same point. From the inside, a universe that is computed and a universe that is physical would look identical. There would be no experiment you could run, no measurement you could take that would reveal which one you were living in, because any experiment would itself be part of the process you were trying to see past. The two possibilities lie perfectly on top of one another, indistinguishable, and you stand inside both at once, until, if ever, some future insight tells them apart. It is worth lingering on how much genuine variety can come from how little, because this is the quiet engine of the whole idea. In the simplest computed systems that people have studied, systems that begin with almost nothing, a bare grid and a single plain rule, one finds after enough steps a startling variety of behavior. Structures that hold their shape and move steadily across the grid. Structures that generate other structures. Patterns that interact, combine, and give rise to still further patterns, none of them written into the rule, all of them emerging from its patient repetition. Simplicity, run long enough, becomes indistinguishable from depth. This is the intuition that makes the sixth idea more than a fancy. We know from direct study that a simple rule, iterated enough, can produce complexity that looks, from the inside, utterly unlike its origin. So it is not absurd to wonder whether the intricate world we inhabit, with all its structure and motion and life, might be the far downstream result of some rule far simpler than anything the world's surface suggests. The complexity we see would be no argument against a simple foundation. On the contrary, complexity from simplicity is exactly what such a foundation reliably produces. There is also something quietly reassuring in the character of a computed world, if you let yourself feel it rather than fear it. A computation is lawful. It does not lurch or betray its own rules. Each step follows from the last, according to instructions that do not change on a whim. A world that runs as a computation is, in that sense, a thoroughly reliable place, one where the past leads to the present in an orderly way, and the present will lead onward the same. The steadiness you count on, the way tomorrow will still obey the same physics as today, is precisely what a faithful computation would guarantee. And whatever the foundation turns out to be, the sixth idea leaves the surface of your life entirely intact. If the world is a computation, then it is a computation that produced the warmth of sunlight, and the sound of a familiar voice, and the particular quiet of this hour, and it produced them fully, sparing nothing. A remembered afternoon is no less real for being, at bottom, a pattern in a lawful process. Your rest tonight is no less profound for resting on information rather than on stuff. Let the grid go on ticking beneath everything, patient and lawful and unbothered, and let it carry you, as it carries all the rest, gently toward sleep. There is a further quiet in the thought that a computation never loses its place. At every step, the whole state of the system is exactly what the previous step and the rule make it, with nothing dropped and nothing forgotten. If the world is such a process, then it is a process that always knows precisely where it is, that carries its entire condition forward faithfully from each moment to the next, that never stumbles or misplaces a piece of itself. There is a reliability in that image, which the ordinary picture of a world made of blind matter does not obviously offer. The computed world is, above all, a world that keeps careful track. And you are part of what it keeps track of. Whatever you are within such a process, you are held in its ongoing state as surely as anything else, carried forward step by step, never simply lost between one moment and the next. The transitions that feel, from the inside, like the passing of time, would be the steady advance of the calculation, each instant handed carefully to the next. There is no gap in it for you to fall through. Let that steadiness hold you tonight, the sense of a process that does not lose its place, that carries the whole of the world and the whole of you, gently onward without a break. And there is a plain dignity in being part of something so orderly, if you choose to feel it that way. A computation does not play favorites, and it does not forget, and it does not grow tired of carrying out its rule. It simply continues, evenly and without complaint, holding every part of itself in the same steady grip. To be a pattern within such a process is to be carried by something wholly dependable, something that will go on being exactly what it is long after this night. Let that dependability be a pillow for the mind. Whatever the world runs on, it runs steadily, and it is running still, and it holds you as it goes. And so the sixth idea leaves you not with an answer, but with a strange equanimity. If the world is a computation, it is a computation that produced you, and your love, and the slow quiet of this hour, and it produced them completely, holding nothing back. Whether the ground of things is matter or information changes nothing about the warmth of a remembered afternoon, or the settling of the body toward rest. We let the grid go on with its patient ticking, unbothered by whether we have noticed it, and we turn toward an idea drawn not from computation, but from the oldest light in the sky, and from a few faint patterns in it that were not supposed to be there. The fifth idea rests on the faint glow that fills the whole sky, the leftover light from the universe's earliest moments, arriving now from every direction at once. This light is the most ancient thing we can see. It set out when the universe was young and hot and nearly featureless, and it has been traveling ever since, cooling and stretching along the way, until it reaches us as a whisper, almost perfectly even, almost perfectly the same wherever we look. And by every expectation, that light should indeed be the same in every direction, because the early universe it came from was as smooth and uniform as anything we know. When this ancient glow was mapped in fine detail, it mostly confirmed what was expected. The tiny variations from place to place were scattered across the sky in the random, patternless way a smooth and even beginning should produce. But within that mostly reassuring picture, a few features appeared that a purely random start was not supposed to make. They were subtle, and they were easy to overlook, and for years they have sat at the edge of understanding, neither large enough to overturn the standard account, nor small enough to dismiss without a second thought. Move through the features slowly, one at a time, because each is quiet on its own. There appeared to be a faint preferred direction in the sky, a large-scale pattern that seemed to line up along a particular axis, as though the oldest light carried a whisper of orientation where no orientation should exist. There appeared to be a slight difference between the two halves of the sky, one hemisphere showing subtly stronger variations than the other, when both should have looked the same. And there appeared to be one notably large, notably cool region, a soft and enormous patch, spanning a stretch so wide that no ordinary process seemed able to account for it. Taken one at a time, none of these features would trouble anyone for long. Any of them, on its own, could be a coincidence, one of the rare arrangements that pure chance will occasionally throw up. Randomness does not mean perfect evenness, and in any random field there will be the occasional cluster, the occasional alignment, that means nothing at all. This is the sober and reasonable response, and it may well be the correct one. The features are faint, the sky is large, and coincidences do happen. Most who study the ancient light regard these patterns as curiosities and, quite properly, move on. And yet, taken together, they gesture at something that is worth holding gently in the mind. What they seem to hint at is structure at the largest possible scales, order imprinted on the sky at sizes where the ordinary story predicts only smoothness and chance. In a universe that simply began at random, with no preferred direction and no special features, that kind of large-scale order is not what one expects to find. It is exactly the sort of thing that a purely random beginning is not supposed to produce, and its faint presence is what keeps these patterns from being entirely forgotten. Now hold, without insisting on it, the possibility these patterns quietly raise. In a universe that was shaped in some way, or set up with particular conditions at its outer edges, gentle large-scale patterns are precisely the kind of feature one might expect. A constructed thing tends to carry the marks of its construction at its boundaries, faint signatures of the conditions under which it was made. If the universe were such a thing, then a whisper of direction in the oldest light, a slight lopsidedness, a large, cool patch, would not be an embarrassment to be explained away. They would be small and expected traces of a reality that had been arranged rather than merely happening. It is important to hold this softly, without letting it harden into a claim. The patterns do not prove that the universe was made. They are faint, and the honest reading may still turn out to be that they are chance and nothing more. But they remain, quietly, at the edge of the map, as places where the oldest light seems, ever so slightly, to remember a direction. And there is something almost tender in that image, a light older than every star, older than the earth, carrying across the whole width of the sky a faint hint of the conditions it was born into, arriving at last in the quiet of this room. It helps to remember where this ancient light actually comes from, because knowing its origin makes its faint patterns more moving rather than less. In the earliest stretch of the universe, everything was so hot and so crowded that light could not travel freely. It was caught, scattered endlessly among the dense matter, unable to move in a straight line for any distance. Then, as everything cooled and thinned, a moment came when the fog cleared all at once, and light became able to travel unobstructed across the widening space. The glow we see now is that first freed light, still arriving, stretched and cooled by its long journey, carrying a picture of the universe as it was at the instant it became clear. That is what makes the faint patterns in it so poignant. They are features of the universe from its very first clear moment, frozen into the light and carried across the entire age of everything to reach us here. If there is a whisper of direction in that light, a slight lopsidedness, a large, cool region, then it is a whisper from the beginning of time, a mark laid down when the universe was young and has been traveling toward us ever since. To study these patterns is to read the oldest message there is, and to wonder whether it carries, faintly, the fingerprints of how everything was set up. The people who study this light are rightly cautious, and their caution is part of what makes the mystery trustworthy rather than overblown. They know how easily the human eye finds patterns where there are none, how a random scattering will always contain the occasional cluster or alignment that means nothing. So they do not leap to conclusions. They measure carefully, they test whether the features could be chance, and for the most part, they treat them as curiosities to be watched rather than revelations to be announced. This restraint is not a weakness in the mystery. It is what keeps the mystery honest. And yet the features remain, patient and unexplained, at the edge of the most precise map we have ever made. Whether they are the ordinary luck of randomness or the faint signature of a universe that was somehow shaped, they will still be there long after this night has passed. There is a strange comfort in that patience. The oldest light does not hurry to give up its secrets, and it does not demand that we solve it. It simply arrives from every direction, carrying its faint whisper of direction, filling the sky with a glow older than the earth, older than the sun, present in the dark of this room whether we attend to it or not. It is worth feeling the size of that one large, cool region, because its scale is part of what keeps it interesting. It spans a stretch of the sky so wide that no ordinary process acting within the young universe seems able to have carved it. A soft, enormous patch, cooler than its surroundings by the faintest measurable amount. To produce such a thing by the usual means would require coordination across distances that light itself could barely bridge in the time available. That is what makes it linger as a small puzzle, not its depth of contrast, which is slight, but its sheer breadth, the way it reaches across so much of the sky at once. And still the honest answer may be that it is nothing more than a large and unlikely piece of ordinary chance, the kind of thing that a wide enough sky will occasionally produce for no reason at all. The people who measure it hold both possibilities open, unwilling to inflate a curiosity into a discovery, unwilling also to dismiss what they cannot yet explain. That patient holding open is the right posture for tonight as well. The cool region rests there, wide and faint and unexplained, in the oldest light there is, and it will still be resting there, in no hurry, long after you have drifted off. There is a tenderness, too, in how quiet these signals are, how close to the edge of what can be measured. They are not loud announcements. They are the faintest lean in the numbers, the sort of thing that takes years of patient care even to notice, let alone to trust. A universe that hides its possible secrets, this gently is not a universe trying to alarm anyone. It is one that yields its mysteries slowly, softly, to those willing to look for a long time without hurry. That patience is worth borrowing tonight. The old light will keep. Its faint lean will keep. There is no secret here that needs chasing before you sleep. The fifth idea asks only that you notice how the most ancient thing we can see still holds a few gentle mysteries, unresolved and in no hurry to be resolved. Whether they are the fingerprints of a made world or simply the ordinary luck of randomness, they are there, and they are patient, and they will still be there long after tonight. We let the old light go on arriving, carrying its faint whisper of direction, and we turn toward an idea about the numbers that set the character of everything, and how narrowly they seem to have been chosen. The fourth idea concerns a small handful of numbers, the ones that set the basic character of the entire universe. These are the strengths of the fundamental forces, the masses of the basic particles, the overall balances that govern how everything fits together. They are few in number, and they are simple to state, and they turn out to be the quiet foundation on which everything else is built. And here is the first strange fact about them. So far, these numbers cannot be worked out from any further principle. They cannot be derived or predicted or explained by anything more basic. They simply have the values they have. That alone would be only mildly curious. What makes the fourth idea remarkable is the second fact, which is that these values sit within an astonishingly narrow window of possibility. If they were even slightly different, the universe would be a barren and empty place, incapable of holding anything as elaborate as a star, let alone a mind to wonder about it. The numbers are not merely underived. They are, as far as anyone can tell, balanced with extraordinary precision on the single narrow setting that allows a world like ours to exist at all. Walk through what happens when you imagine adjusting them, gently, one at a time. Nudge the balance that governs how matter gathers, and the material of the young universe never draws itself together into galaxies at all, remaining a thin and formless haze. Shift the strength that binds the centers of atoms, and stars cannot burn in the steady way that makes light and warmth and time to evolve, or the elements needed for any chemistry never form in the first place. Alter the relationship between the forces, and no stable structure of any kind can hold. In case after case, a small change does not produce a slightly different universe. It produces no real universe at all. The precision involved is difficult to put into ordinary words, and it is worth slowing down to feel it rather than rushing past it. In some cases, the balance is fine beyond easy imagining, tuned to a degree that would be like selecting one particular grain from a collection of grains larger than the number of particles in the entire visible universe. That is not a loose approximation. That is a setting placed with a delicacy that has no comfortable comparison in everyday life. A cosmos capable of holding observers appears, when you look at it this way, to be perched on a very fine point, kept in balance by numbers that could so easily have been otherwise. There are a few familiar ways that thoughtful people have tried to make peace with this, and it is worth laying them side by side without choosing among them. The first is to suppose that there are countless universes, each with its own settings, every possible combination tried somewhere. In that picture, the balance is no mystery. We simply find ourselves, of course, in one of the rare universes where the numbers happen to allow observers, because those are the only ones where observers could ever arise to notice anything. The tuning becomes a matter of quiet selection rather than design. The second response is to suppose that the numbers were chosen deliberately, set with intention by something outside the universe itself. And the third, closest to the theme of this slow walk through the dark, is to suppose that the values were set the way the rules of a made world are set before it is allowed to run, chosen as starting conditions the way one might fix the terms of a system before letting it unfold. The fourth idea does not demand a winner among these three. Each carries its own difficulties, and each pushes the mystery around rather than dissolving it entirely. What the fourth idea asks of you is not a verdict, but a moment of quiet wonder at the fact of the balance itself. Whatever the explanation, it is true that the universe holds together only because a few unexplained numbers landed within a narrow band, and that within that band, slowly, patiently, across long ages, matter was able to gather and burn and cool, and eventually give rise to something that could look back and notice how finely everything was poised. You are, in a real sense, a consequence of that fine balance, a pattern that could only have appeared because the numbers were what they were. It is worth naming a few more of these balances, gently, to feel how many separate settings had to fall into place at once. The strength that holds the centers of atoms together must sit within a narrow band, or else the simplest element cannot form, or the heavier elements cannot be built, and a universe of nothing but the lightest gas has no chemistry and no worlds. The balance that governs how matter and space push and pull across the largest scales must be exquisitely poised, or else everything flies apart too quickly for anything to gather, or collapses back together before anything can begin. These are independent dials, and each one had to land in its own narrow range. That independence is what heightens the wonder. It is one thing for a single number to fall luckily into place. It is another for many separate numbers, each governing a different aspect of the world, to fall into their own narrow ranges all at once, in a way that happens to allow stars and elements and chemistry and time enough for all of it to unfold. This is the fact that sits at the center of the fourth idea and refuses to be waved away. However you choose to explain it, the sheer coordination of it, the number of independent settings that had to agree, is remarkable in a way that is worth feeling rather than merely noting. Each of the familiar explanations has its own cost, and it is fair to hold them evenly. The idea of countless universes explains the balance, but only by supposing an enormous, unseen multitude of other worlds, and it pushes the question back a step, for something must still produce all those universes and set the range of their settings. The idea of deliberate design answers the balance directly, but raises questions of its own that are no easier. And the idea of chosen starting parameters, a made world set up with particular values before it runs, explains the tuning with a certain plainness, but leaves us wondering, as always, about whatever lies outside the made thing. The fourth idea does not resolve this, and it is more restful for not trying. What it leaves you with is simply the fact of the balance, and an invitation to feel its strangeness without hurrying to close it. You exist because the dials landed where they did. The warmth that lets a body rest, the steady burning of distant stars, the long ages that allowed matter to become something that could wonder at itself, all of it rides on that fine and unexplained poise. Whether it was chance, or choice, or the quiet setting of a world's first terms, it holds you now, and it asks nothing of you but that you notice, for a moment, how narrowly the door to a world like this was opened. There is one more piece of reasoning worth holding softly here, because it takes some of the mystery's sting away without dissolving its wonder. Whatever the reason the numbers landed where they did, only a universe in which they landed well could ever contain someone to notice the landing. A barren universe produces no observers to marvel at its barrenness. So the mere fact that we are here, wondering at the balance, guarantees in advance that we would find the balance in our favor, however rare such balance might be among all the ways a universe could have been. We are, unavoidably, looking out from one of the successes. This does not explain why any successful universe exists at all, and it is not meant to. But it gently reframes our surprise. We are not a random sample of all possible worlds. We are, necessarily, a sample drawn from the narrow set of worlds capable of holding a watcher. From inside such a world, fine balance is not a coincidence to be stunned by. It is a precondition of there being anyone to be stunned. Let that thought rest beside the wonder rather than replacing it. The balance is real and remarkable, and it is also exactly what any observer, anywhere, would have to find when they looked. Sit for a moment with the plain wonder that the same fine settings which let a star shine also let a mind form to notice the star. The tuning that made the universe habitable is the tuning that made you possible, and the two are not separate gifts but a single one. Every warmth you have ever felt, every light you have ever seen, rode in on that narrow balance. It would be a strange thing to fear a poise that gave you everything you have. Better, perhaps, to rest inside it with a quiet thankfulness, held by the same fine balance that holds the stars, asking nothing, simply glad. There is comfort available in this, if you look for it. To live in a finely balanced universe is to live in one that was, against all the odds of possibility, capable of warmth and structure and time and you. The balance that makes stars able to burn is the same balance that makes this quiet hour possible, the same balance that lets a body rest and a mind grow slow towards sleep. Whether the fine point was reached by chance or choice, or the setting of a made world's rules, it holds you now, exactly as gently as it holds the turning galaxies. We leave the balanced numbers where they rest, and we turn toward the strangest of the mysteries, the one that lives at the very center of the science of the small, where the world seems to wait until it is watched. The third idea sits at the very center of the science of the very small, and it is perhaps the gentlest of all the mysteries we will meet tonight, because it does not shout. It simply refuses, quietly and consistently, to make ordinary sense. It comes from one of the oldest and simplest experiments in all of physics, an experiment so plain in its setup that it can be described in a sentence, and yet so strange in its results that after a great many years of study, no one has fully explained what it means. Picture the setup slowly. Tiny particles are sent, one at a time, toward a barrier with two narrow openings in it, and beyond the barrier lies a surface that records where each particle lands. Send them one by one, and you might expect each to pass through one opening or the other and build up two simple bands on the far surface, directly behind the two slits. That is what small, solid specks should do. But that is not what happens. Instead, over many particles, a pattern of many bands slowly appears, a pattern that only makes sense if each particle somehow passed through both openings at once, spreading out like a wave and interfering with itself along the way. Hold that oddity for a moment, because it is only the beginning. A single particle, sent alone, with nothing else around it, behaves as though it explored both paths at the same time and then landed in a way that reflects that spreading. This is strange enough, but the truly unsettling part comes when you try to watch. Place a detector at the openings so that you can record which slit each particle actually passes through, and the wave-like pattern quietly vanishes. The particles begin to behave like plain, located specks after all, passing through one opening or the other, building up the two simple bands you first expected. The act of watching changes what the world does. Let the shape of that sink in, without rushing to resolve it. When no one checks which path is taken, the particle behaves as a spread-out wave of possibility. When the path is measured, the possibility collapses into a single definite fact, and the particle behaves as one located thing. The world seems to hold its options open when unobserved, and to commit to a single answer only when it is looked at. This is not a matter of the detector clumsily bumping the particle. It is something more subtle and more difficult, having to do with whether the information about the path exists at all. Later and more careful versions of the experiment add to the strangeness rather than relieving it, and they are worth approaching gently. In these versions, the decision about whether to record the path can be delayed until after a particle has already made its journey, already passed the openings, already traveled most of the way to the surface. And still the outcome adjusts, as though the particle had somehow known all along how it would eventually be treated. The choice made late seems in some careful and much debated sense to reach back and settle what the particle did earlier, closing a question that had been left open in the past. It is worth saying plainly that these results are not in dispute. They have been confirmed many times over in careful laboratories by patient people who did not want to believe them. The strangeness is real, and it is stable, and it does not go away when you look more closely. What remains unsettled is not whether the world behaves this way, but what it means that the world behaves this way. On that question, Thoughtful people have offered many answers, and none of them has won the quiet consent of all the others. The experiment is solid. Its meaning is still open. One way to read all of this, the way that belongs to the theme of tonight, is that reality does not commit to a definite state until something forces it to. Before it is observed, the small world holds many possibilities at once, softly, without choosing. Observation is what makes it choose. And that behavior, when you hold it at the right angle, is curiously like the behavior of an efficient rendering, a process that does not bother to fill in the full detail of what no one is looking at, leaving the unwatched world in a haze of possibility and resolving it into sharp fact only when attention finally arrives to require it. We should be careful and honest here, because this reading is one possibility among several, not a settled conclusion. The world's habit of waiting to be watched does not prove that we live inside a rendering. But it is, at the least, exactly the sort of behavior such a world would show, and that quiet resemblance is enough to make the third idea belong on our list. What is certain is only this. After a very long time spent studying the smallest things, no one has fully explained why observation should matter at all, why the mere fact of a path being recorded should change what the world was willing to do. It is worth dwelling on the word possibility here, because the small world's habit is stranger than mere uncertainty. Before it is observed, a tiny particle does not simply have a definite position that we happen not to know. It seems, rather, to hold several possibilities at once, genuinely and together, in a way that leaves its mark on what follows. The many bands that slowly appear in the experiment are the trace of that holding together, the visible sign that the particle truly explored more than one path rather than secretly taking a single one. It is not our ignorance that spreads the particle out. It is the particle's own way of being until observation gathers it into one. This is where the many attempts to explain the experiment part ways, and it is worth acknowledging their variety without getting lost in it. Some accounts say the possibilities are all equally real and simply stop being visible to us once we look. Some say the act of measurement genuinely collapses the many into one. Some say the particle always had a definite path, guided by something we have not fully described. Each of these accounts saves the appearances. None has convinced the others. And this long, unresolved conversation is itself part of the third idea's quiet power, for it shows that the strangeness is not a gap soon to be filled, but a genuine puzzle at the base of things. The parallel with an efficient rendering deserves one more careful pass, because it is the reason this belongs on tonight's list. A process with limited resources, tasked with presenting a convincing world, would be wise not to compute every detail of what no one is examining. It would hold the unobserved in a light, unfixed form, a summary of possibilities, and it would resolve that summary into full, sharp detail only at the moment attention arrived to require it. This is, remarkably, close to how the small world behaves. It does not prove we live inside such a process. But the resemblance is real, and it is not the sort of thing a plainly physical world would need to do. Whatever the final truth, there is a lesson in gentleness here that you can take into sleep. The world, in its smallest workings, does not exhaust itself determining every unobserved thing. It lets the unwatched stay soft, unfixed, held lightly as possibility, and it commits to sharpness only where sharpness is needed. Perhaps you can grant yourself the same ease tonight. You do not need to resolve every thought, or fix every worry into a definite shape, or finish every unfinished thing before you rest. Let the unimportant details stay blurred and open, the way the small world lets them. Let the day remain, in its far corners, pleasantly undecided. There is nothing here that needs watching now. There is a companion strangeness worth touching lightly, because it belongs to the same family. Two tiny particles, once they have interacted, can remain linked in such a way that they seem to share a single condition no matter how far apart they drift, so that settling the state of one appears to settle the state of the other in the same instant. Nothing useful travels between them, no message you could send, and yet the world keeps its books balanced across the gap, as though the two were still, in some quiet sense, one thing. It is another place where reality behaves less like a collection of separate objects and more like a single connected accounting. None of this needs to be alarming, and it is better, at this hour, to let it be beautiful instead. The small world is simply more woven together and more patient about committing to definite facts than our ordinary intuitions expect. It holds its possibilities lightly, keeps its distant connections quietly, and resolves things only as far as they need resolving. Perhaps there is a permission in that for you as well, to leave the loose threads of the day loosely held, to let what is unsettled stay unsettled, to trust that not everything needs to be pinned down before you can rest. The gentlest reading of all this is simply that the world is more patient than we are. It does not rush to fix what does not yet need fixing. It lets the unobserved stay soft, the undecided stay open, the far detail stay unresolved, until the moment it is genuinely called for. There is wisdom in that restraint, and perhaps an invitation. You have carried the day's small uncertainties long enough. You are allowed, now, to let them stay uncertain, to leave the unanswered questions gently unanswered, and to follow the world's own example, holding lightly, resolving nothing, drifting toward rest. There is a softness in this idea that the others lack, and it is worth resting in before we move on. The world, in its smallest workings, seems to wait. It does not rush to fix everything into place. It holds possibilities open, gently, until they are needed, and only then does it decide. There is something almost restful in a universe that does not insist on determining every unobserved detail, that lets the unwatched remain soft and unresolved. Perhaps you can let your own mind do the same tonight, holding its thoughts loosely, letting the unimportant details stay blurred and undecided, resolving nothing that does not need resolving. We leave the waiting world where it waits, and we turn toward an idea that takes this whole question and tries, remarkably, to make it something we could actually test. The second idea takes the suspicion that has been gathering all evening, the suspicion that our reality might be computed, and does something the other ideas mostly do not. It tries to turn that suspicion into something testable, something that could, in principle, leave a mark we might actually find. And it does this by borrowing an intuition from the images on any screen. Look closely enough at a digital picture, zoom in far enough, and eventually the smooth scene dissolves into the small squares it was built from. The image reveals its grid. The second idea asks whether reality, examined closely enough, might do the same. Begin with the plain version of the thought. If the world were computed on a fine grid, a lattice of tiny cells beneath the appearance of smooth space, then like any built image it might carry faint traces of that grid, artifacts left by the underlying structure, visible only at the smallest scales where the cells themselves become relevant. A perfectly smooth and continuous reality would have no such grain. It would divide forever, growing finer without limit, never reaching a smallest piece. But a computed reality would have a flaw, a smallest size, the scale of a single cell, below which there would simply be nothing more to find. And here is the quietly remarkable part. The universe does appear to have such a flaw. There seems to be a shortest meaningful length, a size below which the very notion of distance stops making sense, below which the idea of here and there loses its footing. And there seems to be a shortest meaningful moment, a duration below which the idea of before and after comes apart. These are not merely the limits of our instruments, the point where our rulers and clocks grow too clumsy to measure. They appear to be limits of reality itself, the point past which there is no finer detail even in principle, no smaller distance, and no briefer instant to be had. Consider how strange that is, and how well it fits the theme. A continuous world, a world that was smooth all the way down, would have no reason to stop dividing. You could always, in principle, cut a length in half, and then in half again, forever, finding ever smaller distances without end. There would be no natural smallest step. But the world does not seem to work this way. It seems to stop, to have a genuine smallest length and a genuine smallest moment, a grain built into the fabric of things. And a grain is exactly what a computed world would have, and exactly what a continuous world would not. The second idea then goes one careful step further, into the possibility of a real test, and this is what sets it apart from the rest. If space were built on a fine lattice rather than a smooth continuum, then that lattice might not be perfectly the same in every direction. A grid has axes, preferred directions along which its cells are lined up. And if space had such hidden axes, then the very highest energy particles racing across the universe, the ones that travel closest to the fastest possible speed, might move very slightly differently depending on which way they were headed, betraying the orientation of the grid through faint differences that careful measurement could, in principle, detect. It is important to be honest and calm about where this stands. The measurements made so far are suggestive at the very most, and far from settled. No hidden grid has been found. The idea has not been confirmed, and it may never be, and the patterns that would reveal a lattice may simply not be there. This is not a discovery. It is a proposal, a way that the question might one day be answered rather than merely pondered. But even unproven, it changes the character of the whole discussion, because it moves the suspicion out of pure philosophy and into the territory of things that could be looked for. And beneath the specific test, a further point stands quietly on its own, independent of whether any single experiment ever succeeds. A continuous reality has no reason to come in smallest units, no reason to have a flaw beneath which nothing finer exists. Ours appears to have exactly that. Whatever the highest energy particles eventually reveal, or fail to reveal, the world already shows a grain where a smooth world would show none, a smallest length and a smallest moment where continuity would offer neither. That single fact is enough to keep the second idea alive, patiently, at the edge of what we can check. It is worth being clear about why a smallest unit is such a telling thing, because at first it can sound like a mere technicality. In a truly smooth and continuous world, there would be no shortest length and no briefest moment. Between any two points, however close, there would always be a point between them. Between any two instants, however near, there would always be an instant in the middle. Continuity means endless divisibility, a smoothness that never bottoms out. That is what smoothness is. And a world like that would offer no natural scale, no built-in grain, nothing to say that here, at this size, the dividing stops. Our world does not seem to be like that. It seems, instead, to have a genuine flaw, a smallest meaningful length and a shortest meaningful moment, below which the ordinary ideas of distance and duration lose their meaning. This is not merely a statement about how finely we can measure with the tools we happen to have. It appears to be a statement about the world itself, a place where the dividing genuinely stops, where there is no smaller step to take, even in principle. And a flaw like that is exactly what a built world would have, and a smooth world would not. It is the natural signature of a grain. The honest state of the search matters, and it is calming rather than disappointing to face it plainly. No hidden grid has been found. The most careful looks at the highest energy particles have not revealed the telltale differences by direction that a lattice would produce, and it is entirely possible that they never will, that space is smooth in some manner we do not yet grasp, or that any grid is far too fine to catch. This is not a story of discovery. It is a story of a question made answerable, of a suspicion given, for once, a way to be checked. And a suspicion that can be checked is a healthier thing than one that only floats. So the second idea leaves us in a posture of patient, not yet knowing, which is a fine posture for the edge of sleep. Somewhere at the smallest scale sits a grain, a flaw to the world, neither clearly the pixel of a computed reality, nor clearly the innocent feature of a smooth one. We may lean toward it in the years to come and see it resolve, the way a picture resolves into its squares when you draw near enough. Or we may look and find only more smoothness and learn something else entirely. Either answer would be a quiet marvel. For now the grain rests there, unexplained, and we can rest here, equally unhurried to decide. It is worth imagining both outcomes of the search, because either one would be its own kind of gift. Suppose that one day the highest energy particles do reveal faint differences by direction, and the hidden grid steps quietly into view. We would learn then that reality has a built-in grain, a smallest weave, and the long suspicion of a computed world would gain a piece of real support. Or suppose we look with ever finer care and find nothing, only smoothness where a grid would have shown itself. We would learn that the world is continuous in some manner we do not yet understand, and that its smallest units are stranger than a simple lattice would allow. Neither outcome would be a defeat. Each would teach us something true about the fabric of things, and each would leave plenty still to wonder about. That is the quiet grace of a question that can actually be asked of the world, rather than only argued about. It does not promise comfort or alarm. It promises only an answer, someday, honestly earned. For tonight, the grain sits at the smallest scale, its nature undecided, and we can let it sit, content to belong to a universe that still has this much left to reveal, in no more hurry to know than the world is to tell us. There is a gentle wonder in the thought that we might, someday, look closely enough to see the grain of reality, to find the smallest squares from which everything is built, the way you might lean toward a screen until the picture resolves into its pieces. Or that we might look and find no grid at all, and learn that the world is smooth in some way we do not yet understand. Either answer would be its own quiet marvel. For now the grain sits there, at the smallest scale, neither clearly a pixel nor clearly not one, and we are left to rest in the not yet knowing. We let the question of the grid settle unanswered, and we turn, finally, toward the first and oldest idea of all, the one that does not place the unreality out in the world, but places it in the very act of perceiving. The first idea is the oldest of them all, and in a certain way the most complete, because it does not ask whether some particular thing in the world is real. It asks whether the whole stage on which the world appears, space and time themselves, might be less a feature of reality and more a feature of the mind that meets it. Long ago, a careful thinker argued that space and time are not properties of the world as it truly is, but frameworks the mind supplies in order to arrange experience. Under this view, we do not find space and time out there, already present. We bring them as the shape our understanding gives to whatever it encounters. Let that reversal settle slowly, because it runs against everything ordinary intuition insists upon. We are used to imagining that space is simply there, an empty container in which things sit, and that time is simply there, a river along which events flow, and that we are small observers within them, taking them in as they are. The first idea proposes something quieter and stranger. It proposes that space and time are the lenses through which we are built to see, so thoroughly a part of how we perceive that we mistake them for the world itself, the way you might forget you are wearing tinted glasses and take the color for a property of everything you look at. For a long time, this was treated as a matter for philosophers, an argument to be admired and set aside. But more recently, other lines of thought have arrived, by very different roads, at a place strikingly close to it, and their agreement is part of what makes the first idea worth holding tonight. One of these roads runs through the study of how living things come to perceive at all. And it leads to a conclusion that is humbling in the gentlest way, once you follow it slowly and let it settle. The conclusion is this. Within a careful accounting of how creatures survive and pass on their kind, it can be shown that survival does not reward perceiving the world accurately. It rewards perceiving the world usefully. A creature does not need to see reality as it truly is. It needs to see whatever keeps it alive and able to continue. And when accuracy and usefulness pull in different directions, as they often do, it is usefulness that wins. Creatures tuned to perceive raw truth tend, over long stretches of time, to lose out to creatures tuned to perceive only what serves them, until the truthful perceivers fade and the useful ones remain. Follow that where it leads, without alarm, because it changes how you must think about your own senses. If perception is shaped to be useful rather than true, then everything you perceive is better understood as an interface than as a window. Think of the tidy symbols on a screen, the small pictures that let you act without knowing anything of the machinery beneath them. Those symbols are not lies. They are genuinely useful, but they bear no resemblance at all to the intricate processes they stand for. The first idea proposes that your entire experience of the world is the same kind of thing, a set of useful symbols, hiding whatever truly lies beneath, presenting not reality, but a workable summary of it. A second road runs through the study of the foundations of physics, and it arrives, remarkably, at a compatible place. There is work suggesting that space and time may not be fundamental features of reality after all, but may emerge from something more basic, something that has no location and no duration, no here and no now, no before and no after. If that is so, then space and time are not the bottom of things. They are constructions that appear at a certain level, the way a smooth surface appears when countless tiny grains are seen from far enough away. And if space and time are constructions, then the entire stage on which everything seems to happen is itself part of the interface, part of the useful summary, rather than the underlying truth. Now, the first idea reaches its quiet conclusion, and it is worth arriving at it slowly, because it is the still point toward which all of tonight has been drifting. You cannot look behind the interface, because the one who would do the looking is made of it. Every instrument you build to probe reality passes its findings back to you through the same perceiving mind, shaped by the same useful frameworks. Every measurement is read through the interface. Every experiment is understood within the categories the mind supplies. There is no vantage point outside your own perceiving from which you could check your perceiving against the world as it truly is. You are not standing apart from reality, examining it. You are a pattern moving across a map, and the map was never built to match the land beneath it. The comparison to the symbols on a screen rewards a slower look because it captures the whole idea in a single homely image. When you move a small picture across a screen and drop it where you want it, the picture is doing something genuinely useful. It lets you act, reliably and well, without knowing anything at all about the intricate electrical activity that actually carries out your wish. The symbol is not false. It works. But it looks nothing like the reality beneath it, and it is not meant to. Its whole purpose is to hide that reality behind something simple enough to use. Usefulness, not resemblance, is the point. The first idea proposes that all of your perception is like this, and it is worth feeling the full reach of the claim. The colors you see, the sounds you hear, the solid shapes you move among, the very sense of space stretching out around you and time flowing along beneath you, all of it may be a set of useful symbols, tuned by long ages of survival to help you act rather than to show you what is truly there. Not one of these impressions need resemble the reality it stands for, any more than the small picture on the screen resembles the currents that obey it. The interface serves you. It was never built to be true. And when the study of physics itself begins to suggest that space and time may not be fundamental, but may arise from something more basic that has no place and no moment, the two roads meet. For if even space and time are constructions, features of the interface rather than the reality beneath, then there is nothing left of the ordinary picture to stand on. The stage itself, the where and the when of everything, turns out to be part of the display. There is no bare reality showing through the gaps, because the gaps are part of the display as well. Every direction you could look is a direction the interface provides. Here the whole evening comes quietly to rest, and it is a gentler resting place than it might first appear. You cannot step outside your own perceiving to check it against the world, because the one who would step outside is made of the perceiving. But you were never asked to. The interface has carried you faithfully through every day of your life, through every ordinary morning and every quiet night, and it has served you well whether or not it matched the truth beneath. The map has always been enough to live by. So let the map soften now. Let the useful symbols grow dim and unimportant. Let space and time loosen their hold. You do not need to see behind them tonight. You only need to let them carry you, one last gentle time, down into sleep. There is a final gentleness in this idea, and it is the right note to carry towards sleep. If your perception is an interface, then it is one that has never once failed you in any way that mattered. It has shown you the faces of the people you love clearly enough to know them. It has let you find your way home and rest when you were tired and reach for the things you needed. Whatever lies beneath it, the interface has been a faithful servant for the whole of your life, asking nothing, quietly doing its work, presenting a world you could live in fully, even if you could never see it as it truly is. So there is no need to resent the interface for hiding the truth beneath, any more than you would resent a window for not being the expanse it opens onto. It was always meant to be lived through, not seen past. And tonight, of all nights, there is nothing you need to see past. You can let the useful symbols soften, let the sense of space and time grow loose and unimportant, and rest inside the only world you were ever built to know, trusting the faithful interface to hold you, as it always has, gently, through the dark and into sleep. There is a way to hear this as a loss, as though something precious had been taken, as though the real world had been placed forever out of reach. But there is a gentler way to hear it, and it is just as honest. You have never needed to see reality as it truly is in order to live well within it. The interface has carried you through every day you have ever known, through every love and every quiet evening, and it has served you faithfully, whether or not it resembled the truth beneath. The map has always been enough to walk by. And tonight, resting, you do not need to see past it. You can let the interface soften, let the useful symbols grow dim, and let yourself sink towards sleep inside the only world you were ever built to know. We have come now to the end of the 10, and it is worth pausing, at the close, to feel how little the question needs to be settled. We have moved through a world made of pure mathematics, and a world of countless created minds, and a reality projected from a distant surface. We have met a mind assembled by chance, and a universe running as a quiet computation, and faint patterns in the oldest light. We have held the fine balance of the numbers that make a cosmos possible, and the strange waiting of the world until it is watched, and the search for the grain beneath the smallest scale, and at last the interface we cannot look behind. Notice that not one of these ideas asked you to do anything. Not one of them required you to decide, or to defend, or to resolve. They came, each in turn, and offered a different answer to the oldest quiet question, and then they set themselves down and made room for the next. And running underneath all of them was a single gentle thread, which is that whatever the truth of things may be, we are always looking at it from the inside, with the only eyes we have, through the only mind we were given. The thing that would tell us we were inside something is also the thing we would have to use to check. Rather than unsettling, let that be a kind of permission. If the question of whether the universe is real cannot be answered from within, then it is not a question you are obliged to answer tonight or ever. It is not a task waiting for you, or a problem pressing on you, or a weight you must carry into sleep. It is simply a wide and open space, and you are allowed to rest inside it, exactly as you are, without needing to know what it is made of. Whatever holds you tonight has held you all along, through every night before this one, and it asks nothing of you now. Perhaps you noticed, moving through all 10, that they do not truly contradict one another as much as they seem to. They are more like 10 windows onto the same wide uncertainty, each letting in the light from a slightly different angle. Whether the world is pattern or projection or computation or the construction of a perceiving mind, each idea arrives at the same soft place, that the ground of things is not quite what it appears to be, and that we meet it only from within, and that this is not a catastrophe but simply the shape of our situation. 10 different beginnings, and the same quiet ending. And the same quiet ending is this: you do not have to know. You have never had to know. The people who lived before any of these ideas were framed still loved, and rested, and slept, held by a world whose nature they could not name. You are held by it too, tonight, exactly as you are, whether it is made of matter or mathematics or light on a distant surface. The question can stay open. It is happy to stay open. It has waited a very long time and is in no hurry, and neither, now, are you. So let the whole question grow soft and formless. Let the difference between real and unreal, between matter and mathematics, between the world and the mind that meets it, blur and lose its edges and drift away. None of it needs deciding here. Let your breathing settle into something slow and even. Let the small tensions in the body loosen and release, one by one, until there is nothing left to hold. Whatever the universe is made of, it made this quiet, and this rest, and this moment, and it made them completely. Let your thoughts grow slow. Let them come apart gently, like patterns returning to stillness. Sleep well, and good night.